So tonight we're looking at part 57, looking at wild harvest edibles. And it's part of our series here on Thou preparest a table before me. And just as a reminder that as you navigate any health challenge, it's always recommended that you partner with a medical practitioner that shares your philosophy of the care of the human body in disease and in health. And that the information that we talk about tonight is for educational purposes, and it's just another tool in your wellness toolbox to help returning to wellness or maintaining good health when well. Shouldn't be construed as medical advice, just a tool that others have successfully used in similar situations. And always investigate any treatment or protocol or procedure for yourself, not blindly accepting anything without due diligence. Thomas Edison said that the doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will instruct his patient in the care of the human frame, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease. That was a very forward-looking statement from back in his time, which unfortunately we haven't seen really come to fruition in our day. But back in a similar era, if not a little bit earlier, in Counsels in Diets and Food, actually Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, 1885, Ellen White says there are many ways of practicing the healing art. And back in that time, she was familiar with a lot of different ways that were being done at that time. But there is only one way that heaven approves. God's remedies are the simple agencies of nature that will not tax or debilitate the system through their powerful properties. Not to say that there's some that don't tax or debilitate, but the one that God endorses are those that don't tax or debilitate. Pure air and water, cleanliness, a proper diet, purity of life, and a firm trust in God are remedies for which the want of thousands are dying. Yet these remedies are going out of date because their skillful use requires work that the people do not appreciate. Fresh air, exercise, pure water, and a clean, sweet premises are within the reach of all, with but little expense. But drugs are expensive, both in the outlay of means and the effect produced on the system. And in 3 John 1, verse 2, it says, "Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers." So one key part of total health is making sure that your soul is prospering as well. Romans 12, 1 and 2 says, "I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." So we're going to start out looking at sumac this evening. And there's a number of different species of sumac. I've seen some in our area here, and I don't know if they're native or if they are transplants, but they are around. It's actually in the same genus as cashews. I was surprised to learn that. Mangoes and pistachios. Kind of a new thing for me to realize that. So sumac is an interesting plant. There's 35 species in North America. So we have Rhus species. They have woody stems. They can also have pithy stems out towards the ends. The feathery compound leaves, you can see them there in the lower picture and the upper picture as well. And this one is actually the staghorn sumac that's being represented here in this picture. But there's 3 other varieties that are quite common. It appears as a shrub or small tree, pithy stout twigs, and has a milky sap. And those with red berries all have edible fruit. So we're going to be primarily focusing on those with the red berries as being the key things to pay attention to. So the edible species, Rhus tiffinia, that's the staghorn sumac that we just looked at. That's the lower picture there. That's all ablaze in red. A really colorful fall foliage, and that's why many people sometimes plant it as an ornamental. And then there's Rhus capaliana, which is the dwarf or winged sumac, and you can see it's more loosely organized cluster there, as well as the arrow pointing to the wings that are right on the stem of the winged sumac. So it actually has leaf projections from the stem, which is kind of unusual. And then there's Rhus glabra, which is also known as the smooth sumac. Glabra is a botanical term for smooth or hairless. And the smooth sumac looks very similar to the staghorn, although the clusters aren't nearly as tight, and it doesn't have hairs on the stems like we see on the staghorn sumac. So the flowers of the fruit, they have dense terminal clusters on the end of the plant. They continue to ripen, and they don't fall off. So you can see the winged sumac here on the right. and has a white flower, and then it has kind of the reddish, pinkish berries there that will continue on in as they ripen. Over on the lower right is the glabra, or the smooth. The berries are there from June to October, and the upper right picture there shows the berries more prominently displayed. And then the Tophinia, which is the staghorn sumac, is down the lower left. So again, it has the more tightly organized cluster being presented there. On the sumac that is in flower there, you can see it has lots of bees on it. So it's it can be an important nectar source for bees. So the leaves are large and oddly pinnate. So there's an odd number in its kind of ranking there. Coppolina has 11 to 23 leaflets, toothed edges with wings between the pairs. You can see that in between each set of leaves there's that extra leaf growing out of the stem. The smooth one has hairless stems or stalks, has a shiny top and a white underside. And then the staghorn sumac, you can notice the hair on the stems, the fresh stems, and the leaves. So that's the primary differences between the three species. The fruit is edible, and also the very young shoots. You can peel them. There's a picture of the peeled shoots there. Some harvest tips: you want to harvest the fruit clusters in the late summer to fall, and you can lick them like a sucker, and they can be a thirst quencher. The very young shoots, you want to peel and eat them before the pitch forms. And that actually, I think, might be pith. That's supposed to say there. That should be pith before the pith forms. You can make a lemonade, a sumac lemonade. So bruise the dried berries. So you see some staghorn flower clusters there. Soak it for 15 minutes in cold water. Then you can strain it and sweeten it to taste, and then refrigerate it, kind of cool it down, and then it's ready to drink. So sumac lemonade. There's kind of a wide variety of medicinal uses for sumac. The leaves can help skin rashes and sore gums and lips. The berries have a number of different benefits. They can be helpful for diabetes. In that sense, they may have some glucophage or some blood sugar moderating effects. Constipation, so help relieve constipation and bladder issues, and other female disorders, coughs and asthma. So it can function in cough suppressant and bronchodilation. It's also a blood purifier, and the tea is beneficial for sore throats. So it can help ease the soreness of the sore throat. The bark has antiseptic properties. So in that regard, it has antibacterial components, because sepsis is caused by bacteria. And then astringent, so that's basically a tissue drawing together component. And so it has those qualities, so it could be good for wounds in that regard. And it's lactation promoter, a galactagogue is a term for that. And then tonic is just a general tending towards health. So a health tonic is something that is directing towards a state of health versus sickness. Tea from the bark or an infusion is helpful for diarrhea. It can also be helpful for fever, constipation, and just general overall debility. Prolapsed uterus can also benefit from a tea infusion. The roots, a tea from the roots, is another astringent. So you could use that as a wash. You could also drink it. It has, again, those blood purifying qualities. Functions as an emetic and diuretic. So fluid removal from the body. And also, in combination with echinacea, can be helpful with treating venereal diseases. And a poultice of the root can be helpful for boils. So if someone ends up with a boil and have sumac around, it could be a helpful poultice for that. The leaves have astringent qualities, again, also good for asthma, diarrhea, and mouth sores. So quite a range of different things for the sumac. The next thing we'll look at is the quaking aspen, Populus tremuloides. So it's called the quaking aspen. Tremuloides is the term for tremor or shake. In the breeze, the leaves will shake. Unlike other leaves, it just behaves a little bit differently, almost like they're alive. So they can be 40 feet tall. It's a deciduous tree. very colorful in areas where it grows. Just a very striking fall tree. Greenish and furrowed bark in older trees, thin and white in younger trees. And the groves are often clones from underground roots. It turns out that the Quaking Aspen has a male and a female tree, and the catkins of the male are on the male tree, and the catkins for the female are on a separate tree. So they're what we call dioecious. Basically, they have two houses. Hence the benefit of having clones, because there may not be male and female Quaking Aspen in the same vicinity. So they can also reproduce via cloning just with the underground root systems. Many large groves are trees that have been growing up from the roots of adjacent trees in their grove. We spent last week in eastern Washington, and they had Quaking Aspen on the property where we were, and there were lots of young trees coming up around, not like weeds, but just small trees coming up, and it was evident they were coming up from underground roots. So those are present in March to April. The catkins, and the male catkins are shorter than the female catkins. Female catkins up to 4 inches and can have 6 to 8 seeds per capsule. There's hundreds of capsules. And we can see those catkins down on the lower pictures. So the leaf is small and glossy, simple and alternate. So alternating versus opposite on the stem. Has finely serrated edges, which are almost imperceptible in this picture, and has a flattened stem. So the fuzzy catkin just right here in the middle of the picture is the male catkin, and the female catkin is the one there on the right. So from an edibility standpoint, the inner bark is edible, as is the sap. The inner bark can be harvested, and the catkins are edible as well. The inner bark can be harvested in the spring and eaten. That'd be the same time as you want to harvest the sap. Sap is going to be coming up. The bark is going to be sweeter because the sap is in the tree, in the vascular cambium, which is just below the surface. You could take a draw knife or a knife of some kind and shave the exterior off, so you're just getting down to the lower bark. It can be boiled like noodles. It can be eaten just fresh. So it's going to have a sweet taste to it. It can be dried and ground into a flour and used as a soup or a stew thickener. We think there's slippery elm bark is one that I think we've talked about in the past in a different context, because we don't have slippery elm around here. But slippery elm is very therapeutic in the sense that the bark is the therapeutic aspect of it, and creates kind of a mucilage when it's moistened, but very soothing to the throat. The sap, you can eat it fresh or boil it down like you would maple syrup into a syrup. It's going to be more dilute than sugar maple syrup, and even big leaf maple syrup. You can make maple leaf syrup from big leaf maple as well, but it's much more dilute than the sugar maple. So it's going to take a higher volume. I think it's about 40-to-1 for the sugar maple, and anything that's less dilute than that is going to take a lot more syrup to create a gallon of sap to make it 1 gallon of syrup. But it can be done. The catkins are bitter, but can be eaten raw or cooked. And don't shy away from bitter things. Bitters, there's Swedish bitters, other types of bitters. Bitters can have good therapeutic and tonic qualities and just general health components to them. So just because something bitter doesn't mean it should be discarded. The cambium chips. So essentially that's something you can make from that inner cambium of the bark. So it's a layer of the vascular tissue between the outer bark and the wood. So you can just take a draw knife and shave that away on the outer bark and have access to the moist inner bark, and then peel away the soft underlayer, and you can heat it. Some people would fry it. We don't want to use oil. In fact, it might be something difficult that you would have in an environment where you don't have any refining things available. But heat it until it's crispy, and you can salt it to taste to make cambium chips. There are other animals that actually eat cambium. The bears will, in the spring, they will sometimes chew off sections of the cambium of fir trees. There's one place where I have run in our area nearby here, where a couple years ago noticed a tree that was obviously damaged by some animal and it had sap oozing out from it. But the only thing I could think of was it was a bear that was after the vascular cambium underneath. And they won't eat a lot of it, and it's not something you would eat as a staple, but as part of an overall outdoor wild harvest food source, it could be added into that. So some medicinal usages of aspen can be antiseptic, again, helping in areas that use it as a tea to wash over the area. Analgesic, so analgesic is pain killing, so it has similar components to it as willow, salicylic acid, which is a main component in aspirin. So in that respect, it's anti-inflammatory. It's good for wound treatment and skin issues and respiratory problems. So one thing that it's beneficial for is rheumatoid arthritis, and that's largely due to its anti-inflammatory and pain-killing qualities for pain relief in joints. The aspen bark is used for that, and it's used internally and externally for joints. So that should say internally and externally. So it's also helpful for wounds and chilblains and hemorrhoids. So tea, you use the tea for chilblains. That's basically inflammation of the blood vessels from repeated cold exposure, but not from freezing. So it wouldn't be frostbite, but chilblains is kind of something just preceding that, where you would have inflammation due to repeated exposure to an appendage, typically hands or feet, or it could be a surface area that's exposed to the cold that would cause inflammation of the blood vessels that are present there. You can use skin applications of bark from the quaking aspen as well. It helps to reduce swelling. There's a picture of a poultice here. This poultice is just a general application of what a poultice can look like. This looks like it could be a flax turmeric poultice, highly yellow, very colorful. You can make poultices out of many things, but just as an example what a poultice might be, or a plaster. It helps to increase the blood flow using quaking aspen, and can function as a wound disinfectant. Again, that's the antiseptic properties. And the crushed root poultice is helpful for infected wounds. So that would require some digging or preparation and or drying of those roots for future use. It's also helpful for coughs, fevers, and respiratory issues. You can make a tea of the aspen bark for coughs, congestion, kind of take the edge off a cough that may be persistent, congestion or phlegm, help to loosen that and allow it to be removed. Colds, which often include upper respiratory infections and fever. So febrifuge is something that helps to reduce fevers. So tea of the aspen bark. So there's a picture of the bark here in the lower right of the quaking aspen tree. When combined with black cohosh, it can be helpful for menstrual issues and menopause issues. So it helps to relieve the pain and cramps associated with menopause in some people. Hot flashes and moodiness helps to reduce the night sweats and headaches that sometimes people have associated with that. Sometimes there can be heart palpitations, help reduce that, vaginal dryness, and mental fog associated with menopause and menstrual issues. It basically functions as, with hot flashes of moodiness. First thing that comes to mind is helping to balance the hormones and helps to normalize the cyclic nature of menstruation. So with women who have or are suffering from endometriosis, black cohosh should be avoided. So you might have to resort to a different type of an approach. But the aspen bark could be helpful on its own, but more synergistic in conjunction with black cohosh. So just an infographic here that I found about how to use aspen. You can use it as a decoction. So basically a decoction is where you would take bark or roots or something like that and be preparing it over a period of time, as opposed to an infusion, which is just a simple tea that has steeped for a short period of time. A decoction is something that's boiled for a little while, or simmered for a little while, not necessarily boiled. So a low heat, several hour extraction process. Usually you use a volume of water that is reduced to half when you're creating a decoction. You can use those extractions and add them to ointments. You can use an ointment that has an infusion into beeswax or olive oil, combination of those two things that can be used externally, or an extract. You could even do a prolonged extract with the glycerin, kind of in a tinctured kind of a formation or extraction. So salicin is the primary active agent that gives its anti-inflammatory benefits, and that's the component that is present and active in aspirin. So to review this and see others in this collection, you can look at www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.